הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week, we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community, and today my guest is Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action Agenda for the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles. That's a Jewish human rights organization. He's been on the show before. Welcome back. Welcome back. But I tell you, I don't remember any situation, any time where, as we record this, it's just after Kristallnacht, and we've had problems. There was even a fight at the Simon Wiesenthal at the Museum of Tolerance. Can you talk about that? What is going on?
Well, we were asked to host the screening of a 43-minute mini documentary that's really totally unedited and not appropriate for most audiences. In fact, extremely difficult to sit through. And I've been with the Simon Wiesenthal Center for 46 years. We deal with the Shoah and the horrors there. The difference between Hamas and the Nazis, as Mr. Wiesenthal, who was the great Nazi hunter, knew, one of the greatest challenges to getting justice, Nazi war criminals, is they worked so hard to erase evidence of what they did. Hamas live streams their brutality. And so what the state of Israel has done, and I think it's a correct decision, although these are not public events. We hosted an event involved also the American Jewish Committee, ADL, and others. But basically, the people who were in our Peltz Theater were people from the entertainment community. And
Gal Gadot was there?
She was not there. She was, I would say, the instigator. She has I met Rabbi Heyer, our founder and CEO. I think she and her husband actually had Shabbat dinner some years ago at their home. And so she asked whether or not we would host. And so, it was set up, extremely difficult even to speak about, but it's important. The imageries that come up about what was done to children, to people who were at a peace concert. Over 300 Israelis were raped and murdered there. There is live footage taken by the murderers themselves in people's homes of throwing a grenade into a shelter and killing a father with the children injured running out. The scenes are horrific. But I think the most important part about having those kinds of screenings is to deliver a message, first of all, to ourselves, but also to the world, that this is not just round 5 between Hamas and the IDF. Because it seems every time you turn around, there's another flashpoint, there's another war. It turns out to be inconclusive, etc. As you well know, what transpired on that Shabbat, Simchat Torah, October 7th, was the largest mass murder of Jews since the defeat of Adolf Hitler in 1945. And I think starting with Secretary General Guterres, right through most of the diplomatic corps, they just assume that, there's a moral equivalence. Some Israelis got killed, and then they went in, round. And now it's just another round. No. Every Jew instinctively knew that what transpired that day meant the following: it's them or us. Them not meaning the entire Palestinian people, but meaning Hamas. And when obviously Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Herzog, the war cabinet, etc., they've seen even worse footage and worse carnage than we have. And so for most of us, when he came to make that announcement that we're going to kill every last one of them, he's basically talking about Amalek. People said, wait, what's going on here? And as more details came out, and by the way, we now know that the original target date was the first Seder night, and that the Iranians called it off because they were in the midst of getting the sweetheart deal with the American administration to get a couple of $1 billion into their pocket. So we're talking, and when we talk about Hamas, obviously they're a spawn of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're now basically their lifeline is to Qatar, and in terms of what transpired, the training, the money, the brutality, it's got the Iranian regime written all over it. So, first of all, I think as Israel and defenders of Israel understand that we start getting the usual visuals and reportage from the New York Times and from Reuters and from AP, et cetera, et cetera. So immediately you have a moral balance. It so happens that last night I was invited on CNN, which is unusual. They don't exactly call us to talk about, well, while we were watching Inside, there were groups of Palestinian supporters and some members of the Jewish community that some of them got into a spat. A couple of punches were thrown across the street from the museum. I think the LAPD did a great job. They separated them. But nonetheless, if we first of all just think about it, the Museum of Tolerance is showing footage that was captured primarily by the perpetrators. The protest wasn't against what the perpetrators did. The protest was against how dare the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance show what Hamas did. That's what the protest is all about, because unfortunately on campuses and on streets across from New York right across. So I just want to also share with you what happened during my interview last night. It was preceded by another interview with a Palestinian American, very, looks like your neighbor. And he was clearly a person in mourning. And he said that 17 members of his family were killed by an Israeli bomb in Gaza City. That was the setup. We'll be back after the break. We're going to talk about Gal Gadot. So what I said, first of all, after I was asked, I said, before we talk about what happened at the Museum of Tolerance, I want to express my deep condolences. First name was Sammy, to Sammy. It's a terrible thing. I have 2 daughters in Israel. I have 8 grandchildren in Israel. This is intensely personal. So I want to make sure that he knows that our hearts go out to him. But I also want him and all your viewers to know one other thing. The blood of those individuals are on the hands of Hamas, not Israel. And what needs to happen to stop this? Give up the hostages, come out with your hands up. That'll be the end of it. But what we know is that Hamas has no interest in the people of Gaza, only to use them to make sure they get more money for 5th generation refugees with UNRWA and all the other goodies, and to utilize the civilian infrastructure as part of the military game plan, which means by definition, Gazans are also going to be human shields, which is a crime against humanity and a war crime. And then, of course, they have their headquarters underneath all the hospitals in Gaza. As we speak, that we're already, it's around Shabbat time in Israel and in Gaza. And this Shabbat, Israel is now in the next phase of its war against this Amalek. And that war is taking place now primarily underground. And Israel has to figure out a way how to flush out these murderers and minimize the casualties of Gazans, and also try not to have to destroy hospitals, even though they're effectively controlled by Hamas.
And make sure that they don't harm the 239 hostages that are still being held someplace underground.
Right. So I'm sure, like you, I watched the latest interview with, I think, a grandmother and a 13-year-old boy. Absolutely horrific. But apparently held by Islamic Jihad. But let's also remember one other thing. And we pray for the release and the safety of all of the hostages from 30 nations. We have no idea if they're still alive. Israel and the United States do. They're not sharing that information with anyone, and nor should they. But what is interesting, again, Stewart, I'm sure you saw it was fascinating, is that Israel is now using loudspeakers in Gaza City to broadcast Shema Yisrael, Hashem
Yes.
Eloheinu, Hashem
Yes.
Echad, to send a message underground to the people who are still alive. Don't lose hope. What's also interesting is, that there are numerous foreign workers, some of whom were massacred, beheaded, and in live streaming by Hamas, but they are holding.
And then some are Muslim.
Yes, and they're being held. They're being. I think many of them, 10 of them, are from Thailand, and then there's been discussions in Iran between Hamas. There's been statements from Malaysia. By the way, Malaysia, which hosts and trains Hamas for many years and have avoided any censure whatsoever. So they have a lot of people pleading the case, including, these are also Muslims, not all, but some, pleading the case. And they talked about, well, they would have been released by, I think, yesterday. They're not released yet. So we need to pray for all of them. We do not know what the fate is of the hostages. And I would just think that what the Israeli government military is saying is your best chance of getting them out alive is to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze the enemy, because you're talking about their leaders are now multimillionaires. Most of them are sitting in Qatar, maybe elsewhere. The number one guy, right? The number one guy evacuated his son 2 days before things started. So, God forbid, in terms of human. Oh no, not us. You guys, are going to do it. And so there are also, I think, there's another key element here, because we can impact on the military sitting here in the United States. But the status quo at UNRWA has to end, because UNRWA schools have been this place for the continued mass brainwashing of generation of Palestinian kids. You'll never find in any of their textbooks a single map that has a name of an Israeli city. You'll never have any discussion of any legitimacy of the Jewish people vis-a-vis Eretz Israel. Never. They're on a war footing. And, they basically, together with what's done so-called in their summer camps where they train in an environment where you want to become a suicide killer, where basically you're taught that your neighbors are interlopers, they have no connection to the land, and they're basically worse than the Nazis. That is the status quo donor nations led by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Japan. I go to Japan very often. I bring it up over and over again. These are donor nations. The view of the Simon Wiesenthal Center is that they should get rid of UNRWA. In fact, they can hold the money in escrow for the Palestinians. The Palestinians themselves can't do a worse job. But what would happen, and I think this is really, when you think about how warped of a battle we're in, one of the Hamas leaders a few days ago gave an interview and said, this underground city that we have, it's not for the people of Gaza.
That's right.
The responsibility for them is the UN and Israel, because 75% of the people are refugees. So it's your responsibility,
Right.
both morally and practically.
The
That's
underground is for
insane.
us. Yes, the underground is for
Right.
us. That's
So they're
people
just insane.
Let me ask you this. More than 2/3 of American Jews, some 70%, say that they feel less safe than they did before October 7th, when the war began, and when the incursion, when the abomination occurred. This,
Yes.
according to the Jewish Federation of North America. They found that 72% of American Jews polled said they thought anti-Semitism was increasing in their community, and in contrast to the 32% of respondents who said general population that didn't see it. The Wiesenthal Center put out a video, basically talking about what happened, Kristallnacht, what's happening today. Let's take a look at that. Very powerful, very short, very powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to round it out, since October 7th, in the week or two afterwards, in the United Kingdom, a surge of 1,350% increase in hate crimes, including 140% in the capital of London. In France, 1,000 cases, including that horrible situation where a Jewish woman was stabbed in her apartment. And just to make sure that everyone knew why, a swastika painted on the outside door. Yes. In Germany, 2,600 Hamas-linked hate crimes. In Austria, a 400% jump. So, yes, we may, I think in the short run, may not be safer. We had a horrible situation where a 69-year-old Angelino was killed as a result of an attack, turns out, by a professor at a confrontation between Israeli and pro-Palestinian. So, of course, we take a look at what's going on there. We see what's going on here. I think that in terms of law enforcement, in terms of the FBI, there is an even greater wake-up call, if you will. But I think that one of the key areas, because if you're going to sit home, shrink wrap yourself, take off your yarmulke, not go to shul on Shabbat, take off your necklace, that's an invitation for the end of Jewry as we know it in our country. So where do we start? Good place is our university campuses. It's time the presidents and chancellors of the most elite schools, from Columbia to UCLA and everyone, almost virtually everyone in between, have been AWOL. We've been hearing all this about, campuses have to be intimidation-free, about worrying about microaggression against everyone but Jews. Sure. And God bless the multimillionaires and billionaires who shut their pocketbooks and their checkbooks at Penn, at Columbia. And I think that is one of the immediate things. If you're an alumni and you probably had a great time when you went to school, you have to have your eyes wide open and say, no more. You just can't write a check on nostalgia. You have to write a check only if your kid or the school that you went to treats and protects Jewish kids like everyone else. Right now, that is not yet happening, but I think some of the university nomenclature are beginning to get the idea that they're going to lose a lot, and not just in terms of money, but in terms of legitimacy. And right now, we're beginning to learn that, for example, Qatar has invested $5 billion, that's with a B, $5 billion to corrupt the higher education elite systems in our country. Pretty good investment, followed by Saudi Arabia and even $1 billion from the UAE.
Explain how they're doing that. They're hiring the professors and getting the professors placed in the schools. And then the professors are coming out with all their nonsense.
That's a good part of it, but I think it actually runs deeper. You kind of say, like, why is it so difficult for a chancellor or a university dean or the Jewish studies program for them? How come they won't say anything? So the answer is this is a byproduct of corruption. It's not so much you have the true believers, and again, you and I are of a different century. So we know that during the years of our struggle for Soviet Jewry in the 1960s, 70s, even 80s, no matter what, we always found on campuses Jewish professors who still believed that Joseph Stalin was the greatest personality of the 20th century and not a big-time mass murderer when Hitler was a relatively smaller mass murderer. So the true believers, the communists who believed that that was the future, including the future for the Jewish people, never mind that Khrushchev and all the others said, no, this guy was in charge of the gulag that just ate up tens of millions of people and erased them, from the world. Mr. Wiesenthal himself said the only difference between communism and Nazism was in theory. So, yeah. And now, of course, we're watching Soviet Jews who left, their children, they're watching that here in America, you have all sorts of young people who've drunk the Kool-Aid. So, we can also point to probably some, in terms of social media and involvement of the Iranians, of the Chinese, of the Russians. But what we have to do is we have to stand up for our rights. We have to become now involved. No more checkbook politics. You're going to have to get involved with who's the head of the local school board, because the other side is deep into this, and they've spent decades in order to place people in important positions of power and responsibility. It's time that we wake up before it's too late.
Would you say those who have taken off the Star of David around their neck, no longer wear a kippah in public, what would you say to that?
Well, I'd like to see it myself, because the first thing I want to do is give them a hug and reassure them that this is part of our destiny. Every generation has to step up and protect ourselves and stand up. And we know that in every single time the Jews try this kind of tactic of just sort of blending in, of not being involved, of not going, it turns out to be disaster. The other part of it, which you can give better grades to, is that, if you go to a synagogue or a temple in the 21st century, you need to have off-duty police and all the cameras and all the rest of it. That's part of it. But if you already do have that, don't stay home on Shabbat. Make it a point to go with a friend, walk with a family. When our enemies see that, they'll change tactics. If they see it works, God forbid, they'll step it up even worse.
You saw what happened in the Soviet Union, when in Russia, when a number of Jews wanted to leave, They flew a plane in, and hoodlums stormed the airport and rushed to the plane, trying to, I don't know what, break in, I guess. How do you explain that?
So I think two things. Number one, we're not sure if some elements of the Russians weren't involved. We don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. But one thing unfortunately, has become clear. Vladimir Putin was the first czar not to be an anti-Semite, the first Russian czar, because I think of his problems in Ukraine. You see now the deployment of anti-Semitism in kind of signaling society that it's okay to go after the Jews again. In addition, on my first trip, I'm based, Wiesenthal Center's international headquarters in the Asia Pacific Rim. And I was very involved, starting with the late 80s, in the Wiesenthal Center in promoting full normal diplomatic relations with Israel. Our Academy Award-winning documentary, Genocide, was screened in 1993 on national television in China. That's an audience of 500 million people, and they showed it twice. For many, many years after Mao's death, there's been an amazing rapprochement and development of great relations between China and Israel and Chinese and the Jewish people. Right now, the most, I think, dangerous man on the planet, President Xi, they've unleashed an anti-Israel and anti-Jewish campaign. They just turn on a dime, and the people who were your friends yesterday are now spreading hatred on social media and around, because the word goes out. We want to signal the Arabs that we're on their side. So, things change, things don't change, and maybe one other point to make that would be helpful is you didn't ask me about it, but I'm going to say about it anyway. What about the Abraham Accords? And my view for the long run is the following. The Arab countries and the Arab leaders in the Gulf, they have a common enemy along with Israel in the Iranian regime. That regime represents an existential threat to them. Forget about what they say at the UN and how they vote. I'm sure out of the 5 times a day that they pray, they're putting in a good word, because they're praying that the Israelis will put an end to this problem, because they've been supporting with billions to the Palestinians for decades, nothing to show for it. They don't understand why Israel's allowed all of this to go forward. What's the bottom line? The Arab states are interested in Israel, I think, for 2 reasons. First and foremost, they can better defend themselves from the Iranians. Secondly, the synergy between the startup nation and deep pockets of maybe being able to throw off significant jobs for the next generation. These are, 2 areas that don't change. Now, the fact that they sent back their ambassadors, in the long range, there's going to be peace. The Abraham Accords will expand. And when the Palestinians come up with normal leadership, they too will have peace. Good.
Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean, Director of Global Social Action Agenda for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Good to see you again.
Thank you. And this is Stewart Ain. Until next week, have a good one.